I always want to take a 1/4 inch seam. So in this case, I'm just actually going to use a ruler that I have in my house. You can use any ruler that you want. And I'm just going to draw a line that's a 1/4 inch in. If you want to prepare in advance, you can draw a 1/4 inch line all around your squares. If you want to do it as they come, that's fine too. And I want to put 2 squares together. So I'm going to take 2 squares of my opposite fabric and I'm going to line them up exactly on top of one another. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sew across that line that I drew. You can just hold your fabric together. It's pretty grippy, it'll stick to itself, but you can also use pins just to keep your fabrics together while you're working. These are pretty small pieces. Normally I wouldn't use pins, but just to show you, maybe I'll put 2 pins in, that way it won't shift. So I'm ready to sew. I'm going to need my thread, and I'm going to need a needle. I'll cut off a length of thread, and you can just thread your needle. I actually like to use a double length of thread in my needle just to be a little bit sturdier. And I learned a trick many years ago, so I have folded my thread in half. Here are the 2 open ends of my thread, and then I have a loop at the bottom. I'm actually going to take the 2 open ends of my thread and thread those together through the eye of my needle. I've licked them so that they're sticky and they stick together, and I'm going to shove both of those 2 ends through my needle. So now I have my 2 open ends here, and I still have my loop at the bottom. And this is going to keep me from making a bulky knot. And you can tie a knot at the end of your thread, whatever works easiest for you. And the way that I was taught to sew quilt squares by hand is to actually not start at the very end, because you'll get bulk and you'll get a little bit of pulling, but start about a 1/4 inch in from the end. So I'm going to go ahead and put my needle through right on that line. I'm going to pull my tails a little bit longer. And I'm not going to pull all the way through. You can see my loop is hanging out there. I'm going to come back up and I'm going to move toward this outer edge. So I'm going to go in this direction. I'm going to come back up on my line. And for this first stitch, I'm going to go ahead and put my needle right through that loop and pull it closed. See that? So that way I don't have to tie a knot in the end of my thread. I don't have to worry about my knot coming out. I basically just catch my loop. If making a knot is easier for you, you can go ahead and do it that way. And then I'm going to take small stitches going toward the end, the outside edge of my quilt block. I'm going to go right up to the end, but I'm not going to go over the end. You can see I'm very close to the end there. And I'm going to go ahead and take that pin out because I don't need it anymore. Now you can see that I'm very close to the end. Now I'm going to start working my way back the other direction. So I will have a little bit of overlap in my stitches. That'll make them secure on the end, but it'll make sure there's not any bulk at the end there. And I'm just going to push in, and then I'm going to come back up through the other side. And I'm trying to make my stitches maybe about 1/8 of an inch long, using my thumb to hold the fabric. Just in through the top and out through the bottom, and then in through the bottom and out through the top. And I'm just going to do that all the way across. Now some people like to weave their needle in and out like this. I don't like to do that. It makes my stitches wider and longer, and just kind of not as secure. But if that's what you're used to doing and you want to sew your square that way, right? There's no quilt police. Whatever works best for you. So I'm just going to go in and out all up and down that line that I drew. This is a good time. I'm usually listening to audiobooks. I've been doing this long enough that I can watch TV while I'm doing it. When I get to my pins, I take them out so they're not in my way and they don't tangle my thread or get my thread caught up in it. I'm just going to work my way to the end like I did before. I'm going to get close to the end, but not exactly at the end. So you can see I'm a little close there, but I'm not on the end. And then just like I started, I'm going to work my way back in for maybe 1/4 of an inch. Again, just so that my thread is not ending at the very end of my fabric. And I'm going to come up and then I'm going to tie off. And to do that, I'm going to take my working thread of my needle and I'm going to slip it through one of my existing stitches. That's going to make a loop. You can see this big circle that I'm making here. See the big circle? And I've gone through the loop. I'm going to come up through the bottom of my loop and pull it closed. Ta-da! I've made a little knot. If you want, you can make a double knot. I find it's kind of bulky and this is perfectly strong enough for me, and especially because I don't cut right exactly at the knot. I'm going to cut about 1/4 of an inch away. And there you go. I've got a seam. Open this up. This is what it looks like. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to finger press this seam. You can finger press. Traditionally, a lot of quilts are pressed to the darker fabric so that this seam doesn't show through the front. I'm just going to run my finger over it. Sometimes I might use something flat like a ruler to just sort of press it down. And I'm going to do that on the front as well. Just kind of use my fingernail just to make it nice and flat. If you prefer, you can also press this seam open if you think that'll be easier for you to work with. I just sort of press it to the dark side out of habit because that's the way I was taught. And then look at that. Ta-da! You have sewn 2 quilt squares together, 2 little pieces of fabric. You're already well on your way to continue quilting.